First question we're asking everybody is, why are you running, and why are you the best candidate?
Thank you. I'm running for Texas 17 primarily because of a belief at the time that my party was losing 7 members of the Texas delegation. There was a feeling that the momentum that was gained or being held by my party in the congressional delegation was maybe in question. And I received a call from people who are within the district, including county chairmen, who knew that I was happy and not going to run up in Dallas. And they said, we need help. We're concerned about making sure that we have a quality person. We believe you're growing up in Waco and living in Waco for as long as you did, and your knowledge of 40% of the district that included Freestone, Limestone, Leon, Brazos, and Robertson County when your service was here was in line with our thinking today. I have a 100% voting record with the Texas Farm Bureau. Not only when I represented for 8 years the 5th District of Texas, but also afterwards. My voting record was consistent with what they would consider to be conservative and leadership for the district. And quite honestly, they wanted to win. But what they were looking for is a person who would be able to go with knowledge of Washington to represent a district that is in real need of making sure that Texas A&M and Baylor University transportation needs a growing district and the important activities that go on in Washington of strong representation from a person who had seniority as opposed to starting over would present to themselves and for the party. So I had the conversations with these people, and I made a decision based upon 3 county chairmen asking me to come back that I would do that, and I did. And I moved to Waco and reestablished myself there. Have been forthright about moving to Waco. Got a house in November 1st, and that's where I live, and that's what I do.
You bring up moving. Congressman Flores has been critical of your moving here. He says you moved here only because you lost in Dallas. Why should voters vote for you and not for someone who has lived there longer and who they feel that they might be able to trust just because of the residency issue?
Well, let me state this. The district has had 2 previous congressmen who moved into the district, including Bill Flores, who moved from Houston. I recruited him in Houston to come and move into the district 10 years ago, 2010. He did that. I think he served the district, had a content with it. He had been to Texas A&M before, which was not part of the district. Mr. Edwards did the same thing, served as a state senator out of Duncanville, moved to Waco. I was born and raised in Waco, became an Eagle Scout through a paper route from 2nd grade, 3rd grade, 4th grade, 5th grade, 6th grade, 7th grade, 8th grade. My family had established itself as a well-known entity in Waco. We went to church there. I grew up with those values. The residency issue is, as you know, not required. It's required by the state. You have to live in that state. I was perfectly honest about I'd lived in Dallas. I was moving. I was asked to do this. But I had represented about 40% of this district very ably, I believe, and people were very happy. I would, every single month, I would visit every single county in the district, though I lived in Dallas. And I brought a content and continuity of a conservative voting record, of representation, of meeting with people, of representing a rural part of the district. And before the district for 8 years was Waco to Bryan and east to Tyler. That's a very large area. And I believe I did a great job to represent them, and they felt like I did a good job to represent them. So I believe that most people that are running right now, many of them have spent a great deal of time away from the district. As I did, I went to Southwestern University in Georgetown, Texas, graduated, went with Southwestern Bell Telephone Company, spent 16 years, moved 7 different times. Believed I learned a lot in each one of those locations and represented a great company. And when I came back, then represented Congress for those 8 years, 40% of the district. So if moving back home is an issue to people, I would say to them, I have your values, I have your best interest, this is where I live, this is where I grew up, these are the values. I'm not changing the way I vote, I'm not changing the way I represented, I'm going to do the exact same thing. Go to the church today that many people went to church with me earlier, know people in town, know my way around, know the way around the district, and feel very comfortable doing this.
So we've been talking about Waco and College Station are, I guess, the biggest population centers in District 17. But the district also includes over 100,000 residents in Travis County.
Does.
How would you propose to, represent those Travis County residents, or is there commonality and shared interests, values, issues?
Yeah, I think that is an important question about the representation of every single, not just person, but the interests of the district. As you know, this district has rural parts, it has urban parts, and it also has suburban parts. The people who live in Austin, Texas, primarily Travis County, Pflugerville, represent people who work in this area. They need good schools, they need good transportation, they need good job opportunities, and I believe that Austin opportunities abound in this area in particular. The corridor of I-35, the corridor of Dell, the corridor of north of that into Williamson County, all offer opportunities, including going west. They are in a high growth market. So I will have to be very keenly aware of how important their jobs are. And I think a primary responsibility to them is to listen to them, to understand the needs. I would also say that there is a large community of veterans that constantly need to make sure that they have a congressional member that is effectively able to represent them, that understands their needs. I think that the high-tech community here is very important. My background, I served with Southwestern Bell and AT&T for 16 years. I spent 3.5 of those years at what might be called the former Bell Labs in New Jersey, that I spent 3.5 years, including being on what was the team of the year with the development of broadband. It was called ISDN, and I was on the original team that invented broadband. Now, that was a long time ago, but it was still technical, the most technical leading edge issues at the time. So I have a background in technology and understanding of that. I have a family. I understand and respect families, and preparing for the opportunity to send your children to their way of school. My son, my oldest son, wanted to be a doctor from the time he was 6 or 7 years old. He graduated from medical school, went to Southwestern, but graduated from Southwestern, went to Texas Tech University Medical School. He's now a resident in South Carolina, along with his wife, who is a physician. I have a son who is 26 who is a Down syndrome young man. I am very integrated into the disability community and think I understand to a great degree about families and communities and schools that want and need help in special education and in educational issues, and understand why we have changed in education the way we have from Washington to make things work for people better back home, but with the need to make sure that the federal government fully funds, as when I was a member of Congress and chairman of the Rules Committee, we added more money several different times to make sure that that the needs of school districts where they had special education, there was a higher level of funding in them. And I believe I have that ability to identify with families, whether they have children that are headed to a medical school, technical school, or whether they are dealing with problems that they may have with their local schools in dealing with education for disabled children. I have spent a lot of time working with veterans that are reintegrating themselves from the military to find technical activities as well as medical outlets that will allow them a better chance to reintegrate back into not just their own community, but in their own family and within their own lives. So I think this is what I will see and have seen in this area and parts that are east of here, where many people who chose to come be near Travis County, but may not exactly live in downtown Austin or in Buda or other places. They've come here for the right reasons, and I want them to be very happy and find good schools, great education opportunities, good transportation and better transportation. We're a growing state, and so that's what I would expect to find here, and did have found it and would be a part of it. Once again, I will be in every single county, every single month, as I was for those 8 years in the 5th District, in representing people, and they would deserve that, and I offer my promise to do that.
A key part of your platform calls for balancing the budget, yet you voted for President Trump's tax cuts, and the federal deficit has increased more than 25% in the last year. How do you square your call for balancing the budget with your support for the president's tax cuts?
Well, it's one of the more interesting votes. To explain it to you, it's brought in more revenue than ever. We actually have more revenue than ever that is coming into the federal government, but as a student of this activity would understand, we have mandatory and discretionary spending. We still have tens of thousands or millions of people a year who move, as we understand the boomer phase, people who are turning 62 to 70 years old, who are moving away from work. With the success of having work, the stock market is rising as a result of what we have done. Jobs are abounding and there's new opportunity. But this has moved a large number of people to retirement. And as you know, that is not something that we budget for, but it is part of the federal spending equation. And so we have in essence, the three major portions: Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security. Sure, Obamacare is in there also, but what Republicans have done is attempted to grow the paying base that is there, and that is called employment. There are some 7 million new jobs, but about 5 million have gone from not being employed or without a job. Maybe they were students, and we're not going to argue that point, but 2 jobs. And that has sustained not just Social Security, but the ability that people have to take care of their own lives. It has taken people several $100 billion a year away from what would be unemployment compensation and other government-funded positions directly to where they're paying in now. And so there was this fine line about having a tax cut. Obviously, our friends that are on the other side want to spend $30 trillion more by more government programs. It's Medicare for all, and that has been a very difficult conversation for them, even in their presidential politics. But in Republican politics, we believe that the most immediate thing was to get investment and opportunity back to where we grew jobs, to where we had people who could make their own decisions. It was counterbalanced with cutting the rate that a corporate tax rate. So it went from 35 to 21. In that time period, we have seen where we are the most competitive. I believe instead of being tied, we are the most competitive in the world there. And so you're seeing lots of money and influence and investment come directly to America. And the instability of the world today, you see, whether it's China or other countries, where their markets are flowing to America because this is the land of opportunity for them and for employment. So there will always be, until we make proper evaluations, there will always be deficits. If you leave America the way it is and our programs, that's what will happen. But in that process, you would look ahead and see where, while we have extended some 15 years the life of Social Security, because there's more people now working, that has helped extend that life, we need to be prepared for our future. Social Security, it needs to be reevaluated again. And as we really begin to understand what has happened is that we now have a life expectancy that's about 25% higher than what it was when Social Security was first begun. And our leading edge healthcare researchers and scientists will tell us that looking at an average lifespan that would be available to people well into their hundreds, maybe even more than that. Our programs today in Social Security are not designed for the average person to live 40 years on Social Security. They were designed where 50% of people would have passed away and 50% would be then covered. And we've extended well past that. And so this is a program that we need to be fair about and look at about who needs to be on it and how we're going to sustain it. I have had a bill for a number of years, including when I served, that I believe would be a realistic debate point of talking about how we actually save Social Security. Overall on the budget, I believe that if you look at my record and the record of the Congresses in the past, you will recognize that we took hundreds of votes. I think that sustained at least a Republican or conservative pro-business perspective, pro-taxpayer. We held government spending flat. In 2011, we moved back. There was a shutting down the government. It was a fight with President Obama, but we moved back after the failure of the Committee on Committees to come up with the spending plan. We actually, by shutting down the government, moved back to 2008 spending levels that we kept 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, and 18. Minor differences in there with a residual budget that we had that was there, what was called OCO, Overseas Contingency, where we set that aside and we moved that into spending for the military. But otherwise, for those 8 years, we viewed in the House constitutionally where all revenue matters begin in the House of Representatives, and a decision was made that I was, if not the leader of, one of the leaders on, to make sure that we should hold government spending flat and allow the government to make its changes and learn how to operate with less, because of the conversations that were held with military and other economic leaders who said we could go broke. We could actually break our bank like Russia was broken, and economically we have to make tough decisions. So the Republican Party in the House, as chairman of the House Rules Committee, I was instrumental in this. We had others that served as chairman of the Budget Committee who made great decisions, and our conference went behind that. And we said, we're not going to spend more than we did the year before. We're going to allow government to adjust itself around what it gets and what it has. And I think it saved about an average, at that time, about an average of $125 billion a year was the normal increase. And we said, let's hold it there. So over these 8 years, you could look at almost $1 trillion difference. We might have today $1 trillion more of discretionary spending if we had not made those decisions back then. Has it had an impact on the outlook of the size of the government? Yes. Has it had a lot to do with showing the discipline and the restraint from one party who said, we are going to do what we said we would do. We are going to effectively do as well as we can, knowing that we had a Senate that didn't always agree with us, and a President Obama, who always wanted to spend more, as most presidents do, Republican or Democrat. But we held constitutionally to the line that the House would make that determination. So I believe that it is hard to do. I believe that it does require leadership, and not a lone voice, but rather a voice of leadership who, as I did in 2009 and 10, I sold across the country our need to spend at the 2008 spending levels. Why 2008? Because President Obama and Mrs. Pelosi and Harry Reid had an $870 billion spending stimulus package that they wanted to embed within the normal budget. And we chose not to do that. So we backed off. We backed off cash for clunkers. We backed off cell phones for everybody. There is more than enough opportunity that we have in this budget, if it's allocated properly, to make sure that our military, to make sure that our veterans, to make sure that our education systems are handled well, that roads and bridges can be handled. It's just that it requires the House, the Senate, and the President to make those necessary changes off existing money that we have. But if we're in a growing economy, which is what we are, I can rationally tell you that I believe that the tax cuts are making a huge difference, that America is competitive, that people have jobs, and the stock market, as you know, in the last year grew some 30%. And that is an indication, again, about people's ability to put their money into a system and work hard and see the fruits of their labor. Preparing for college, preparing for their future and retirement is the right thing. I am proud economically of what we have done. There are some things that I disagree with in the tax bill. There are some things that I would have done way differently. But there are some things that were proposed that I had an opportunity to avoid that being bad tax policy. But overall, I would say that one of the most important things we did is change what had been for some 20 years of my service in Congress, where we waited till the last day that we were in session to do away with to include the R&D tax credit in that year's tax policy. If we will, and we did, make R&D tax where you can write it off as a regular business deduction, we will better prepare for the future. So there are a lot of things that we did that I hugely agree with, and some that I wish we had done differently. But overall, I will tell you that the success that we had of putting this country back together, I am very, very proud of. Oh, by the way,
Sorry.
when President Obama had his opportunities and President Clinton, certain areas of the country did really well. The entire country is doing well now under this tax cut because it was not specific, it was across the board. And I think that that is a huge advantage. I was in South Carolina where my son goes to where he's in his residency, and they are booming. This district is booming. Texas is booming. And I think that it's because jobs have and investment have ignited a new reality, and that is America wants to be strong again.
So the country's booming, Texas is booming, but as you travel District 17 and as you campaign, what are you hearing from voters about what keeps them up at night, what worries them, what are the issues that matter to them?
Well, I think the issues that really bother a lot of people is the changing political structure of our country, that we are seemingly the two parties are further apart than ever. And I think that when I first went to Congress, I viewed that they were apart, but there was a lot of common ground, a lot of things that we agreed on. I will tell you that on 9/11, I think we felt that when the country was attacked, but soon after that, President Bush was attacked because he chose to protect this country. And people said, oh my gosh, if you go and take a fight to them, they're surely to attack us here. And the other view of thought was, if we don't go protect ourselves, it is going to happen again. Now, we could look back at history and say, was that the beginning? Was Watergate the beginning of this? I don't know exactly where the beginning was, but we have seen continually where the parties have grown further and further apart. I think my party, the Republican Party, felt this most keenly over the last couple of years in dealing with the terms that we have come to know, whether it's Tea Party or whether it's establishment or whether it's Rhino or whether it's other things. It's an attack on inside the party. I think the Democratic Party had before now in its minority phase, but yet they had President Obama, they had Article 2. I think that they began seeing themselves differently with President Trump. I will tell you that, what do I hear from the district? We were with a number of Democratic candidates the other night in Fairfield, and they argued how terrible health care is. And yet we just had Obamacare, and we're told that it's the greatest thing and how it would solve all the problems. The facts of the case are real simple, and that is government needs to be more flexible in how it has its policies. It needs to be better able and adaptive to move with people rather than stuck. The parties likewise need to be driven, instead of the further apart, they need to be coming together, and I would call it a Venn diagram of people who have conservative and what I would call progressive or mainstream thoughts, but still with the idea of it working for people. And this Venn diagram could have existed now, except the thrust for the bitterness at Barack Obama, at Donald Trump from the former viewpoint of Barack Obama has caused this dialogue to where people do the opposite. Instead of working for the benefit of people, they are working, the Democratic Party and the House of Representatives is working solely from a power structure. I was chairman of the Rules Committee for 6 years. During those 6 years, we tried to be fair and open, and I would have members up and listen to full content. It did not mean that we always had open rules. It did not mean that we always made every amendment in order. But we would have amendments in order, and we would allow motions to recommit, and we would allow full debate and discussion. And we did try and offer fair resolutions. But because we handle a lot of tax matters, as this editorial board would understand, tax matters are not open rules. Because you then open up the entire tax code as opposed to specific reasons why you might work in a tax bill. So the Rules Committee now is simply a political basis of trying to defeat and do politics with Donald Trump. And I think that has diminished our ability to find the common factors when dealing with really important pieces of legislation. And I think that it's important that we get back to that.
So, what are the issues that people would like to see Congress find that common ground on?
I think that there are a number of areas, and one of them would obviously be how are we going to handle health care. Health care, I think this editorial board knows that I spend about half my time between veterans and veterans healthcare and healthcare. About half my time was spent on that. I have a bill that was, I think, very important and important for people to understand. And that healthcare bill, essentially, instead of tinkering around the edges, goes right to it and says we need to go to a plan where every single American would have an opportunity to either have employer-provided health care, like the Austin American-Statesman, like the Washington Post have, where their employees receive their health care from their employer, where they're able to make contributions to their health care on a pre-tax basis, where they can get a $5,000 pre-tax ability to save on a pre-tax basis. But if you are not in that plan, if you are self-employed, if you are small business, if you are a lawyer on your own, if you're a real estate agent on your own, you're self-employed, you do not get these tax opportunities. And so the bill says that we would allow people to receive a tax credit of $3,000 for an adult and $1,500 for a child, and they would be able to apply that tax credit to a similar or very close opportunity to what any business like American Airlines or AT&T would offer their employees, to go to get a group plan as opposed to an individual plan. An individual plan is really why Obamacare is in trouble and why it costs so much. You're not allowed. They argued everybody will be in it, but you're on your own coverage. And we believe that a group plan would be available. You would be allowed to have this deduction, in essence, by a tax credit. The money would not come to you, it would be applied, and you would be able to buy into the same sort of plan that an employer would be allowed to, and that first $9,000 for a family of four would give them balanced opportunity, just as someone that worked for an employer-provided health care plan. It provides further opportunity for hospital systems to be able to receive an opportunity to offer health care within their system, provided that they would provide end-to-end services. And if they did not, an opportunity to avoid what we know today as surprise billing. Surprise billing, where you go out of network, go out of network, or they may offer a service to you, but when it comes to paying the bill, your insurance company or someone may not have that relationship and pay that bill. It allows lots of things that would be what I would call 20/20 compliant. In other words, the way people really live their lives today, it would allow people the opportunity to pay a cash price and get the top price, but walk in and get, in essence, the best price that's available if they don't have that cash ability. So I think it's a modern plan. It's one that's endorsed by the National Physicians Policy Council, some 600 physicians across the country. It comes with the integrity of an economic analysis from Dr. John Goodman, who is the father of the HSA. It is about 240 pages as opposed to thousands of pages, and it allows Obamacare to be an option also. I don't know why anybody would take necessarily Obamacare unless you were getting it for free. And that I do understand. And that would be available, but for families and individuals that seemingly have an opportunity and want their own policy and want their own portability and want their own control and want to choose their own doctor and want to work within a system that might be like their neighbor, we think it's a realistic chance. That's what I think people would really want and need in this district, and why we need to have that discussion.
Does it protect pre-existing conditions?
Absolutely. Because we don't do away with the Obamacare law. That, as you know well in this editorial board, has wrapped up every single piece of health care. If you do away with Obamacare, you literally have to start over. What I want to do is make health care better. What I want to do is to give families and individuals an opportunity to have the same type of employer-provided health care coverage that any large employer might make available to their employees, with the same opportunities for coverage and to have the group plan, and would give people a chance to have their own doctor and their own plan, and it would be portable and it would be prepared for the future. But once again, options as opposed to one size fits all.
Well, it seems like back when there was more of a push to repeal Obamacare, the Republican Party was not of a single voice on what should replace it or how to move forward. Why was there not enough coalescing around what you're offering?
Well, I think it's important to note no one really knew, not even the president could describe until his second election, what Obamacare was. It took years and hundreds of billions of dollars for them to go through models and databases that failed and people who were promised things only to find out that's not the way it worked. As I recall, he said families would pay less in health care with Obamacare than what they had ever paid for health care. That is not true. They said it wouldn't be one dime of taxpayer money. That is not true. So they had to get further away from their misstatements to then say, oh, after the election we sold this, but this is what it's going to look like. I would say that the president liked to say, well, they want to do away with it, but they don't have a plan. That was disingenuous. That was not true. It is true that we had not while we had the bill, well, it was not widely known and understood. That's because all these issues, like a balanced budget, take time to talk with people. We use the National Physicians Policy Council to go into people's offices to talk with them. And it just time. But we did have a plan, and one which we can explain and one that's in writing. And the president simply did not want to give us credit for that. And that's the president's prerogative. He could be that way. I'm not saying that he understood a lot about it. But he obviously, if he knew, if he were told the truth, Obamacare would be an option. If you would choose that to be an option, just like Medicaid would be an option, just like having a chance to go to an employer-provided type situation. They would all be available. You decide, instead of one size fits all, you decide what you want. And I think that they were disingenuous about giving us credit. It's easy to say, oh, you have nothing. Oh, yes, we did, including concepts that have been talked about in Republican presidential politics.
A lot of people, including elected officials, talk about we need to secure the border. What does securing the border look like to you, and does that include a border wall?
Securing the border is very important. As this editorial board knows, my father served as federal judge in El Paso from 74 for 6 or 8 years in El Paso, which was epicenter. Juarez is immediately across the border. It has been a flashpoint area of corruption. It's been a flashpoint of violence. It's been a flashpoint of a number of factors. And my dad, as federal judge, had to deal with people who were here illegally. And certainly, you recall Jimmy Chagra, and how Jimmy Chagra became really the largest cocaine and marijuana dealer, at least in this end of the country, for a long period of time, and exporting and importing certain things back there and bad things here. So I've seen how he dealt with that from a legal perspective and dealing with people about drug cartels. And I well remember the drug cartels putting a $25 million hit on his head as FBI director. So we've known that there is a problem with the border. The question is, how do you go about, in a reasonable perspective, where you want trade to flourish and where you want there to be human interaction, because Mexico should be a very dear friend, and Mexicans are very important to Texas. The Mexican citizen, I believe, wants a close association with the United States. They're our largest trading partners. We have much in common with them. But over the years, the drug trade and the infiltration of the extreme money, as well as the desire that we have in our country to consume these things, brought what was Colombian cocaine and other things directly into Mexico and caused problems within that caused problems with us. I am for the border wall. We must have a border wall, and that is because I have been down many times with our agents who find themselves outgunned and overrun. And when we only have several agents that cover a large sector, it's just a matter of time before the other side knows where they are and exploits their advantage, whatever advantage that they would have. I've been out in Arizona and seen where we have the fence, where we have a fence, not a wall, but there's a barrier there. And it has allowed our agents to more effectively monitor and put into place ways that they can look at these drug traffickers and smuggling, human smuggling, which we've all seen the carnage that happens there. So it's a management tool whereby people, meaning our law enforcement officials, would be able to funnel people in, see people that were outer liars, effectively take care of that, and then stand a better chance to effectively look at trade, human people who are going back and forth that have every reason to do that between two great countries, and for us to effectively, legally monitor our situation. But you cannot do that if you do not have barriers in place to control that. Lastly, perhaps the most important thing here is that the men and women who are doing this many times just to protect the communities that are along the borders. The violence that is in our border communities has been more excessive than what living in Afghanistan or Iraq would be. And our American citizens are entitled to know that our government, who has the authority and the responsibility, can protect their lives and not allow that to cross over. I mean, for a huge number of years, internally, there were struggles where the police were being outgunned. To avoid that from happening in our country is critical, and I support our ability of law enforcement. Lastly, I am for our law enforcement organizations. And I think that the men and women, just like our medical community that are on these front lines, need to be supported with rule of law. That rule of law finds itself today struggling with the old laws from back in '08, but this is where we are. And I think we got to give our law enforcement and our communities that are there the benefit of the doubt that they need help, and we should do it.
Turning quickly to gun violence, do you support any reforms that people are talking about, such as universal background checks, red flag laws, anything there that you'd be willing to support?
You know, I think that the reality of it is that states have an opportunity to make many decisions themselves. And we have seen states that have done that. I'm not saying I agree or disagree, but when we look at one of the most graphic problems, it was out of Florida where we had the school shooting. In fact, the police had been to that individual's house some 12 or 13 times. An analysis of that would reveal that they passed and have a consent decree in Dade County that encourages law enforcement not to arrest bullies or people that threaten others if they're school age. And there's this consent decree that makes it more difficult for law enforcement to assess risks against their citizens and against children in schools. You saw where even the police officer who was there did not go into the school. I don't know why he did not. But I think that effective law enforcement is what is needed. Effective law enforcement, when it's in place, it not only catches people, but it is a deterrent to crime. And I believe that this is directly within the hands of people who are state officials. Now, is there a circumstance, and are there circumstances where when we see these things we need to make accommodations? Well, there was the one outside of San Antonio just a couple of years ago where we learned that a man who had been in the United States Air Force, I believe, and had some problems that should have been reported to civil authorities through the NICS database, that the government did not process. And I think we corrected that. I think that there's been an emphasis on that. So yes, I think we all have that need to stay aware, but simply to make a federal law when a state really has the ability to effectively view itself, I think that's better. The persons that we had in this state did what they did in this state. They were citizens of this state, and they did bad things, and I'm very sorry for that. But I'm on the side of effective law enforcement and believe that states, a governor, our state, has that opportunity to look at those decisions as opposed to Congress.
We're starting to run up on our time here, but some in your party have said that what the president did with regard to Ukraine was wrong, but that it didn't rise to a reason to remove it from office. Where do you stand on that?
The president, in his decision making and in his rebuttal back and forth of a decision, I believe We have seen presidents in the past, we've seen vice presidents in the past who have made decisions about withholding dollars, information, all sorts of things for public policy. I believe that the president recognizes, in my opinion, that he would do it differently. And I think that that is something that people learn from. President Clinton had to learn. President Obama had to learn things that they did. They might have done differently. Do I think that he did anything wrong? I think he would do it differently next time. Do I believe that that rose to a level of impeachment and to the investigation that has taken place? No, I do not. But once again, there's been this narrative the entire time about Russian collusion and everything else that is meant to diminish his ability, the country's ability to move to the great things that are happening. So I would hope that the president has learned in this process a good deal, but I do not believe in any way that there's been evidence that he did an impeachable event, had an impeachable impact as it relates to that issue.
And your name has come up in the Ukraine situations. Should that give voters pause?
Well, I think if they did not know that I have completely complied with, as a witness, which is what they described me as a witness, I was asked to comply. I agreed to comply, and I've completely complied with their request.
And there was some speculation that all happening a week after you announced your campaign, that it would hurt your campaign moving forward. Have you felt like voters are even asking you about that or worried about that?
I think if people and they have recognized, I'm completely complying with any request that's made. What else can I do?
I'm curious, you said that you think the president has learned from this episode. What makes you think that? Why do you believe that? I mean, doesn't he say this was a perfect phone call, and he seems to think, and he was triumphant this morning about the. What is it you see about what he said or things he's done that make you think he's chastened about this episode?
Well, a number of things. The most important one is when this was brought up as an impeachable offense, he said, fine, go ahead and impeach me. He taunted the Democrats to do what they did. And I believe that if you look at it, you would have sat down and tried to be open about it, that I think there was some appearance that they did try and explain it, and all that did is lead to more questions from the other side and want to know. We have to investigate. We have to know all these things and use Congress.
I thought you meant that.
I did. I think he's learned a lot. I think he's learned a lot, and one of them is that his behavior of challenging people is probably not something that would be in everybody's best interest. I think that he would.
So you learned a political lesson, which was.
No, I don't know if that's political. I think it is. Instead of saying you can challenge me on everything, come on, let's do it. I think he's learning how we work together with Congress to form these ideas and gain consensus. And I think he has learned that. I don't think that you do battle with people. I don't think you challenge people. I think you become more honest and open. And I would hope that he would be honest and forthright. Here's what I did, here's why I did it, and here's what we're trying to do. But the model that he had at the time was the Vice President Biden at the CFR in January of this year touting his stopping foreign aid that would be given to Ukraine under a circumstance that they would chose that they called corruption. And the president looked at that, and I think that he's learned you just can't look at that model and say, well, that was okay, so what I do is okay. I think he's now learned I need to be more intuitive of understanding and applying the powers of the presidency, the opportunity for what might be gained from interaction with a foreign country, and was dealing with the new president there also. And so I think he's learned a lot. And I would hope that as much as I believe it.
I want to ask one more question. Rural hospitals have closed, including in this district.
Yes.
You talked earlier about the booming, the boom as a consequence of the tax cut. But is the district booming, and what could you do as a congressperson to address, if anything, to address things like the closing of a rural hospital?
Yeah. I think we recognize over some period of time, going back to at least President 41 administration, that we have changes dynamically that are occurring in our health care. Number one, there aren't as many doctors as compared to the population. Number two, technology was driving centers of excellence that might be in kidney in one part of Texas and heart another, and people really want to go to those centers of excellence. And it is hard to do that in a rural hospital setting. I think that our rural hospitals are looking for a transition, and I was down in College Station meeting down with one of the hospital systems, and they were describing how they are now, just as Baylor has and just as other hospital systems have, they have these outreach centers that are all over, not just the 17th Congressional District, but actually all over Texas, where they will come in and perform certain duties and do things that are necessary. But taking a hospital and having people stay in there or to do surgeries is no longer necessarily, except on an emergency basis, necessarily what they want to do. They will normally transport people up to these centers of excellence. We need to make sure that our hospitals in this district and rural hospitals are prepared and can be competitive to provide the things that they do. But the model for paying them to have a hospital and all these beds is not working. And so they need to be there to do what they can best do. And these are models that I think the hospitals and the physicians are becoming aware of. But we need to make sure that our people, wherever they are, can get the very best care and choose to go where they want to go. But probably increasingly, these hospitals will not be for long-term care. These hospitals will not be for extensive surgeries that are where a center of excellence could be, but they will handle many routine matters, many things that can be handled, up to and including a birthing of a baby, up to and including stents that might be available, but not necessarily heart surgery, and that we need to be flexible of how we do that. But these hospital systems recognize that, and they need to be given that flexibility.